for timing your speech are as follows. When there are 30 seconds left, you'll hear a short ring. When time is up, you'll hear 2 short rings. When it's 30 seconds into an extension, you'll hear a long ring. And upon hearing that, you have to stop your speech.
The rules for timing your cross-examination are, when there are 30 seconds left, you will hear a short ring. And when time is up, you will hear 2 short rings. And upon hearing that, you have to stop your cross-examination. Any evidence cited during the debate should have a corresponding evidence card, which may be reviewed upon request by the cross-examiner and their teammate.
The card needs to be returned at the end of the constructive speech following the cross-examination. For audience, please turn off your cell phone or turn it to a vibrate mode. When the debate is still in progress, please do not chat or use flash when taking pictures. Thank you. First, affirmative constructive speech, 4 minutes.
Honorable judges, fellow debaters, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am the first speaker for the affirmative side, and we affirm that the Taiwan government should make public sex offenders' personal information. To start off, the affirmative team's definitions of the terms in the topic are as follows. The Taiwan government has all branches and specific organs mentioned in the case below of the government of the ROC. Public, as to open to all ROC citizens to access, sex offenders, perpetrators of crimes detailed under the ROC Criminal Code, Part 2, Chapter 16, and personal information as information gathered under the Sex Offenders Information Management Methods, Article 2, Sexual Assault Offender Registration and Inspection Methods Decree, Article 4, Sexual Assault Crime Prevention Act, Act 9, and there will be a listing of the nature of the crime. For the debate, I will be discussing the proposed plan in the first 2 contentions, which elaborate on the importance of the right of innocence, and while my second speaker will continue my team's case by espousing the other significant harms. Moving on to our plan. The mandate is to revise the MOHW method and allow public access through the internet and the police records. However, a point of clarification is that there will be a clear categorization of the threat of the sexual offender. It will be taken into consideration the risk of recidivism and the initial crime. So more information will be released for those who are serial rapists, who have done it again and again, and there will be very limited information on those who had committed statutory rape. And the other was a consenting individual. The agency will be the Ministry of Health and Welfare, the Department of Protective Services. Enforcement is the Ministry of Justice and the National Police Association, NPA. The funding. The cost of obtaining the info is already covered because the government has already started collecting info. They have just not released it, and the money is taken from taxes. Workability. Model. United States of America. Megan's Law requires law enforcement authorities to make public the information of registered sex offenders. Our first contention is that the wording of this resolution should implies that we are arguing of whether or not we should implement the policy, so the focus should be on whether or not we should do it and not on how. So contention 1, the right of the at-risk should, contention 2, the right of the at-risk should not be jeopardized for the rights of those who have already invaded the rights of innocence. When we allow sex offenders to revel in the safety of anonymity while the general population lives in perpetual ignorance of fear, there is something seriously wrong with the system. Unfortunately, that is the current one we are stuck with in Taiwan. Releasing the personal information of sex offenders in a publicly accessible domain and raising awareness about it would provide the citizens of Taiwan to have at least a basic security, knowing where the potentially recidivist offenders dwell. This argument will be expanded upon by the second speaker in his speech. Although one may argue that the rate of recidivism among rapists is comparatively low, it cannot be denied that it exists. Are we supposed to wait for numbers to rise before taking action? Can we as human beings do that with a conscience? The affirmative side firmly believes that if there is any way that measures can be taken to prevent a rape, which is not only a violation of body, but also severe irreversible blow to mind and soul, then it should be taken. Is it just that a violent and previously convicted criminal may receive a right to security, but the rest of the population cannot? Never. Citizens of Taiwan are left vulnerable, not knowing if they are in close proximity of a dangerous individual. Sex offenders can roam free with a reassurance that they are safe from public scrutiny, but the majority, the innocent, must suffer and sacrifice their rights. In addition, we must keep in mind that these sex offenders have already committed an illegal act, and most times it is monstrous and despicable. During the course of the offense, the individual has already taken the rights of an innocent. As a nation, we should come together to ensure that measures be taken to protect the rights and well-being of that risk. When denying support for such a case,
Say negative, cross-examine first affirmative, 2 minutes.
Yeah, I want to make sure first why this is wrong. So you mentioned that at the moment that these sexual offenders have invaded the human rights of the victims, they lose their human rights.
well, it depends on the rankings that we have mentioned. For example, such as public shrieking is not really that much, but we are also...
So you mean...
Yes, rape is a very serious crime.
Okay, and I would like to ask, what is the main purpose for, so what is the ultimate goal for the affirmative law?
The affirmative side would like to provide a means for the population
So
to protect themselves, to be informed of the situation.
So inform the citizens and allow them to protect themselves. And by how will you protect them? So you're telling them how they look so the citizen can get aware of these people, or what is
So that they're aware that if they are surrounded by dangerous individuals.
by how? I mean, you tell me by how. So how can through the plan of the affirmative side can allow the citizens to get aware by the danger?
Because they have the access to this information, for example, where they live. So you would know, for example, if you have a child and you live next to a child rapist,
So,
you
knowing
would
the address and
know.
knowing the face and name, maybe. And is there any evidence and proof to support that the plan is going to work?
For example, as I mentioned in Megan's Law, for example, if
Well,
they had
if
known
Megan-
where she had lived, where the rapist
So,
lived.
but I remember that according to the Megan Law, they didn't have any direct link between the publicizing the information and lowering the citizen rate or either writing their rate. So, is there other evidence that links?
Yes. The Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent
So
Offender
how-
Registration Act.
What is it pointed out in that research?
The fact that they have to release the information and people can use it to protect themselves.
First, negative, constructive speech, 4 minutes.
Good day, honorable judges and distinguished fellow readers. We at Negative strongly disagree with the policy to make sex offenders' personal information public because we believe that the plan is not appropriate and will not be effective. In the following speech, I'm going to explain why the affirmative policy may cause more problems to both these sex offenders and the whole society. A study conducted by Ministry of Justice shows that during 2006 to 2011, the percentage of sex offenders with sexual crime priors is 9.6. This data also implies that first offenders in sexual offenses are the majority. Based on data from Ministry of Interior, during 1999 to 2002, about the relationship between victims and offenders, over 70% of sex offenses, the victims know their abusers in Taiwan. Combining the two data, basically the majority of the sex offenses are committed by acquaintances and first offenders. Therefore, we at Negative believe that if we implement the policy, it may discourage the victims from reporting the crime to the authorities, and thus deteriorating the situation of which the victims are already in. Based on data from prosecutor's office, the 5-year recidivism rate from 2006 to 2011, which means the rate of sex offenders committing sexual crimes again, is 3.7%. We at Negative understand what lies behind the numbers is numerous innocent victims being put at stake. This has been an issue we need to eradicate. The Legislative Yuan passed the amendment of Criminal Code in 2005 and Sexual Assault Crime Prevention Act in 2011. The status quo is that the offenders should receive physical or psychological treatment until the danger of recommitting sex crime has been remarkably reduced. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 10, Clause 3 states that penitentiary system should comprise treatment of prisoners, the essential aim of which should be their reformation and social rehabilitation. By implementing the plan, sex offenders may receive discrimination and harassment. It will be more difficult for the offenders to go back to the society. It may also cause more serious social problems and actually increase the risk that they will repeat the crime. from a survey conducted by Levinson from Lynn University in 2005 indicates that sex offenders may experience events such as the loss of job or home, threats, harassment, or property damage. Also, in some extreme cases in the United States this year, a South Carolina man targeted a sex offender at random, killed him and his wife, and later told deputies that he planned to kill others on the state's sex registry. There has been no significant study that can prove making registration public can decrease the number of the crime. At the same time, another study conducted by Washington State Institute for Public Policy indicates no clear pattern and no significant difference in recidivism rates for either sex offenses or total offenses. Comparing registered sex offenders with those committing crimes prior to the implementation of the law. The amendment of Criminal Code and Sexual Assault Crime Prevention Act and the implementation of Sexual Harassment Prevention Act both raise the public's awareness, which is reflected in the rising number of crimes reported to the police every year. So we the initiative disagree with the policy of publicizing sex offenders' personal information. Thank you. And that's done for cross-examination.
First affirmative, cross-examine first, negative, 2 minutes.
Okay, so you said that most are first offenses and done by acquaintances, so you would admit that there is indeed a recidivism.
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay, so how does this connect to that people are discouraged from reporting the crime?
Because I said that 70% of the offenders are acquaintances. So it means that the offenders are people we already know. So the victims may not want to tell the police that
Okay.
these offenders are acquaintances.
Thank you. So the status quo is physical and psychological treatment. However, there is still a recidivism rate. So how can you reconcile this and claim that this is enough?
No, but also the status quo has said that the cases which are being reported are increasing. So it means that the status quo, the government has made good education, so the people may tell the police.
Yes, but I'm asking, how can you prove that physical and psychological treatment, if there is still a recidivism rate and it's still existing and it's not lowering, then how can you claim that this is enough?
I don't claim, but although there is a recidivism rate, but the status quo is sure that the therapies would be working because after years there will be progress.
So you have no proof?
Currently, no.
Okay. So there was also the idea of the loss of life, and would you admit that this is not a common occurrence of vigilantism?
Sorry?
Would you claim that it is a common occurrence for people to go after?
Second affirmative, confronting speech, 4 minutes.
Honorable judges, fellow debaters, and esteemed guests, I am the second affirmative, and I will begin by giving my rebuttal as well as developing our stance. So first of all, I would like to draw up 3 points that the opposition brought up. First of all, they brought up how psychological treatment was currently going on and is a better solution. However, according to a report released by the county's government, the amount of sexual offenses have actually increased in the past few years. For example, in 2011 to 2012, it increased by 10% for a total of 1,500 sexual offense cases. And that shows that this medical treatment isn't exactly working. And in fact, we are getting an increasing number of sexual offenses cases every year. So this just shows that medical treatment is not exactly an efficient way. And we cannot rely on this if we want to actually protect our citizens. Second of all, they brought up how it is difficult for offenders to go back to society. However, the fact is that according to the Article 22 of the Taiwanese Constitution, once a person has broken the law, then they automatically forfeit their protection from the government, meaning that the government no longer has an obligation to exactly protect them. They have already forfeited their protection by the government by invading the protection of other people, and thus this is negated. Next, they brought up how there have been there have been sex offenders who have been killed. However, there are examples brought up in America. And in fact, in Taiwan, the homicide rate alone is already low enough. And there are very, very few sexual offenders that are killed intentionally. And thus, this will not be a problem when it comes to our argument. So moving on to our own case. So our second contention is that raising awareness increases protection measurements that may be taken. So as we know, the information, already every year we conduct information checks for these sexual offenders. Every year the MPA already spends millions of dollars trying to, looking for these sex offenders and making sure where they are and detailing their locations. Now the thing is, even if we do this, exactly what is the purpose of gathering this information if we're not going to use it? We already have this information. We already do it every year. We do annual checks. In that case, why not bring it one step further? Why not allow our government to use this information to actually bring change? If the information is already collected, why not just spend a few $100,000 to bring the information to everyone to provide better security for the entire country? This is a benefit that we're already a very close step to, and thus we believe that we should bring one step forward to improving our country. Our third contention, rape causes lifelong emotional pain and psychological trauma. According to studies by Professor Arnaud, there is psychological trauma associated with rape, similar to PTSD. Now this brings us a few cons. First of all, there are economic cons. First of all, once these people are within rehabilitation, they are unable to work, rendering them useless to the economy. Second of all, the government has to spend a great deal of money to rehabilitate these people, and this in turn causes a large sum of money flowing into these medical centers when nothing is actually done, and therefore it's harmful to the entire economy as a whole. Second of all, it causes social doubt. As people are unable to be protected by the government, they will begin to question the government's ability to protect the citizens. Now remember that a government's purpose in its society is to protect its people. And if a government is incapable of doing it, the people will have growing doubts. Now, we want to ensure that the people can trust their government. We want to make sure that the people will see the government and be like, this is a person that I know I can trust. And if the people cannot trust the government, then we will have a state of chaos and havoc that we do not want in our society. So honorable judges, if you do believe in the protection of human rights, if you do believe that the Taiwan government is capable of bringing change and a better society for all, please vote for the affirmative. Thank you.
First negative, cross-examining, second negative.
Good afternoon.
Second affirmative, 2 minutes.
So I mentioned that the current law, the sexual offenses cases are increasing.
Yes.
But then how can you prove that it's because the status quo, so it's because that there are more offenders being there, so the sexual offenses cases are increasing, but not because of the education is successful, and so the people are doing more to report their cases.
Could you restate your question?
I mean that, how can you prove that it isn't because the Taiwan's education is successful, so if
the Taiwan education was successful, then we wouldn't have an increasing amount of numbers of sexual offenses. We would have a decreasing amount of sexual offenses.
No, I mean that then there will be people that, because 70% of offenders are acquaintances, so then people will...
And as the status quo state, these 70% of people are in rehabilitation. Now, if these 70% of people are in rehabilitation, then why are they still coming back to conduct sexual offenses? Now, this is the problem I'm bringing up. The status quo is not working.
Okay. And how will our plan decrease the rate since that 70% are acquaintances?
Well, the thing is, Megan's Law, it provides people the information. So indeed, the 70% are already known. But the other 30%, are we just supposed to not care about them? Are we supposed to just allow them to continue by providing them information?
The rights of the other 70%?
The other 70%, they will still receive benefits under the...
What kind of benefits?
The status quo, unless the opposition believes that the status quo is not protecting these people. The purpose of the affirmative team is simply to provide even more protection for the people who are under sexual offense cases.
And what about the sex offenders' privacy?
As I've mentioned before in Article 22 of our Constitution, once sexual offenders conduct rape, they are no longer under the protection of the government. Thus, even despite, as bad as this may sound, they are not.
So you're saying that they don't get a second chance.
They forfeited their rights as for protection.
Second negative, constructive speech, 4 minutes.
Good afternoon, honorable judges, fellow debaters, and ladies and gentlemen. And first of all, I would like to respond to the affirmative side. Well, the affirmative side that it have stated that as long as the sex offenders have committed crime, they lose their human rights. But I would like to question, if they lose their human rights and they should not be rehabilitated into the society, then what is the point of the prison? The prison is prepared to let the sex offender pay off their price and get rehabilitated, get re-educated and therapies to help them become a new man. If we are not rehabilitating them, then all the costs we have spent on the prison is a total waste. And it's like a big point of the financial debt of Taiwan and all countries. So I would like to ask the affirmative, if they are not rehabilitating them, so are they suggesting that we should give life sentence, like the internal life sentence to these sex offenders, or even death penalty? Because the affirmative side is not putting them back into society. And thus, will definitely build up barrier and from allowing the sex offenders blending into the society, and well, they're actually forcing these sex offenders to commit a crime again, because the society it's not suitable for them to live, not suitable for them to continue their life, and maybe the prison is the only solution that they can live in. And furthermore, I would like to respond to that. You have mentioned about increasing the cases. However, the affirmative plan didn't actually give us any proof and evidence to show that their plan is going to decrease the increase in the cases. And furthermore, well, the publicizing are definitely those that have already committed crimes before. And the citizen rate, according to our first negative, as mentioned, is only 3.7%. And since 1996, when we started therapy, it has dropped from 7.7% to 3.7%. And that shows that the method of treatment is useful. However, well, the only purpose that the affirmative plan are looking forward to are allowing the citizens to be aware. Well, but the affirmative is releasing photos, and now the affirmative plan is actually asking everyone, like everyone in this room, that as long as you look at this photo like a wanted photo, and you should memorize it, and you should recognize it in your daily life. Maybe you look at a month ago, and like a month later you saw that, and you say, you need to recognize that man is the man I look in the wanted, and I should be aware of it. And that is definitely impossible. As we have mentioned, that there is about 4,700 sex offenders a year. It's definitely impossible for anyone to memorize this much of data and recognize it. So the affirmative plan is not logic to put into execution and enforcement. And furthermore, I would like to mention that the affirmative did not give us any proof and evidence, any scientific research and analyzing to show that, well, through publicizing information will allow to raise the public awareness. And according to the research done by the past 15 years by the three countries, Canada, Britain, and the United States, which have passed the publicizing information policy, and they failed to come up with any research to show that the publicizing of information can raise the public awareness or reduce the rate. Thus, we the negative deny that making the information of the sex offenders information public can do any benefit to the Taiwan society while protecting the human rights of the sex offenders. Then for cross-examination.
Second affirmative, cross-examining second negative. 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. So you mentioned that there's a 3.7% recidivism rate, right?
Yeah, and it's
So in that case, if we multiplied and did the math, then 15,000 sex offenders of the last year times 3.7 would be around 50,000. In that case, if we multiply by 3.7, that would still be around 4,000 sex offenders.
Well, according to our data, there's only 4,700 for the past year.
Our data is from the Ministry.
So, may I ask which year is it?
2012. 2012, and it is from the Ministry of MOI.
Well, however, we doubt that the affirmative can lower the recidivism rate.
So therefore, you believe that we should just let these sex offenders go off free?
No, we are not saying that. But the CL code has mentioned that they have therapies and they are asking them to come back 2 times a week.
However,
Again,
as I've mentioned in my speech, the rates are still increasing. In that case, would that not
well,
prove
my
that your
fellow
medical
debater has
rates are
mentioned
not working?
in the response that it might be an improvement in education so that the victims are willing to, well, report to the police. So it might not be bad thing. Well, the victims are asking for help.
Okay. You do acknowledge that Article 22 of the Constitution still applies now, meaning that regardless of our plan, it's once sexual offenders do conduct crime, that their rights are taken away.
Well, not taking.
As
You say that they lost their humans, right?
No,
But
as
that
in,
is
it is already under the Constitution, meaning it's already enacted. Meaning,
But
because our ability to send them to prison is included in this.
But that's temporary taking it away, not taking it
Yes,
away.
that is what this is what the
But-
affirmative side
Well, the
means.
affirmative is saying that they are taking it away for like
We
the
never
last-
brought up. We only mentioned Article 22 of the Constitution.
Okay,
Okay,
so
thank you.
for the Constitution, temporary is taking.
Okay. But do you agree that our plan is elaborate enough to impact?
No, I doubt that, because there is not a lot of detail.
Thank you.
5 minutes preparation. negative rebuttal speech, 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, honorable judges and distinguished debaters. We, the negative side, still strongly disagree that Taiwanese government should make public sex offenders' personal information. And as we, the negative side, stated before, we believe that although criminals violated other people's rights, but since the time when they committed crimes and since the time they were sent into prison, their human rights were taken away. But once they're released, it means that they're released back to the society. And when they're back to the society, we, the negative side, believe that means that he can regain his human rights. While the affirmative side still believes that it's okay to violate their rights. And as the affirmative side mentioned from the Constitution, it's okay to violate their personal rights because they committed crimes. However, we are already violating their human rights when sending them to prison. And if they're violating their crimes, it means that they're publicizing their information at the time when they're in prison. And once they're out of prison, the government is not allowed to violate their crime. Violate their human rights. Therefore, what's the purpose of publicizing their information when they're in prison? And also, as we mentioned, it's 70% of them are acquaintances. Therefore, we already know these people. When we already know these people, what's the purpose of knowing their personal information? Since we already know them. And also, under the current status, we already have rehabilitation and therapies. And although the rate is increasing, but as my fellow debater mentioned, it might be because of the education done to the public, and making the public more and more willing to report the crimes, but not just because the sex offendings are rising. And also, the affirmative side took Megan's Law as an example. However, Megan's Law there's not a specific statistics shown that Megan's Law is useful and effective. Therefore, we believe this plan we the negative side believe this plan will not work. And also, the affirmative side stated in the first affirmative speech that today we are discussing whether we are adopting this policy and now how to do it. But however, we all need to evaluate the whole plan before adopting a policy. When has we ever seen a policy being adopted before knowing what the plan's detail is? Therefore, we believe it's a misunderstanding of the importance. And also, the affirmative side believes that it is not violating the human rights. However, once the information is leaked out, the affirmative side failed to come up with a plan to stop the information from leaking out. Therefore, we, the negative side, still strongly disagree that we should publicize the sex offender's personal information. Thank you.
Affirmative rebuttal speech, 3 minutes.
Honorable adjudicators, fellow debaters, esteemed guests. Today, the affirmative will affirm that the Taiwan government should make public sex offenders' personal information. And I will run through some of the negative points, and I will build on the affirmative case. We affirm the affirmative case. They've said that there's an increase in the number of reported cases, but they haven't shown a distinct link between the increased their correction and the status quo and the reported cases. And so we can interpret it that these cases show that the actual sex offense crime is increasing. So, and they've also said that the recidivism rates have decreased from 7% to 3.7%. But do little calculations, 7% from 1996 gives you around 3,000 sex offense cases, and 3.7% in 2011 gives you about 4,000 sex offense cases, which, so you can see that it hasn't really changed much, even though the rate is different, but the actual number of sex offense cases has remained the same. So that means that the status quo, their correction measures, the counseling, the psychotherapy, the medical attention, hasn't really changed much. So we can see that the status quo hasn't really changed much, and the affirmative is proposing an alternative solution, a way to disincentivize committing sex offense crimes or recommitting sex offense crimes, and at the same time allowing the public to inform themselves if they're at risk for to a sex offense crime in a given certain locale. And this is a very desirable course of action. We do want to change, reduce the recidivism and general sex offense crime rates. Whereas the status quo hasn't seemed to be working. So, yeah, and then they've also said that there's also the argument about human rights, that point of clash. So what we really want to emphasize is that they've lost the benefit of doubt when they committed this crime. It's true, we want to make the process of rehabilitating and reintegrating into society as smooth as possible, but they could possibly recommit, and it's too much risk for us to say, you know what, let's just let them go from prison scot-free. They might recommit, and they've said that 70% of people are acquaintances, but the 30% of people are not acquaintances. 30% is statistically significant. We can't expect that just because 70% of people are acquaintances doesn't mean that people around them who don't know them are not at risk of a sex offense crime. So the implementation of the affirmative plan is highly desirable. It is a change to the status quo and should definitely be adopted. So please vote for the affirmative.
That's the end of this debate. In 5 minutes, we'll have